So why I've picked land and buildings to talk about is because it's one of the most common areas where councils get it seriously wrong, and it can cost them an awful lot of money. So I want to go over some of the basics, some of the danger points in kind of the 15 minutes we've got to look at these. So first of all, non-business activity. Councils can reclaim VAT on their non-business activity. And that's what things they do when they provide freely available services and facilities, when they're acting as a local authority, providing stuff for the public. So providing a freely accessible park, children's play areas, a war memorial, things like that, where nobody's paying every time they come to use the facility. That also includes all the time they spend acting as a council, so holding council meetings and things like that. There are certain things we can charge for as well and still treat it as non-business because they're statutory functions that either you have to do or you have to do in a certain way. And these are particularly allotments, which I know was mentioned in the previous session. So allotments, burials, because if you're a burial authority, it's your job to bury the dead, regardless of whether people can afford to pay for it or not. Public toilets, even where there's a small charge, they're generally treated as a non-business function because virtually nobody else in their right mind charges for the use of toilets. And recently this year, the supply of sports facilities to the public, and we're still seeing kind of HMRC's interpretation evolve on this, but that's another example of where we can make charges and it's still treated as a non-business activity. The other thing that we can also treat, and indeed anybody can treat as non-business activities, where you grant a lease for £1 or less. So if you lease a piece of land or lease a building to somebody and the lease is for a nominal £1 or a peppercorn, we can also treat that as a non-business activity. And non-business activities mean that we can reclaim our VAT on those activities under Section 33. Local authorities are pretty much the only bodies, apart from kind of government bodies, that can reclaim VAT on stuff that they aren't doing in a commercial way. I'm just going to have a look at what people have said in chat. Okay, that's fine. That was about slides. And okay, that's nothing for me to worry about. That's lovely. So when we come to charging for land use, as soon as we start to charge for things that don't fall into that list I've just given you, then we're undertaking a business activity. We're charging people for goods and services, the use of our land and so on. And we need to understand whether we're making VAT exempt supplies, which can have a serious impact on the council, or whether we're making taxable supplies that might mean we need to be VAT registered. And I've paired up some examples here just to show how complex it can be, and you need to be very careful as to what you're looking at. But don't take this as a definitive list of everything there is, because it'd probably be twice, 3 times as long. So VAT exempt. First of all, if you sell a piece of land, normally it's exempt from VAT. On the other hand, if you sell land with a newly constructed building, and new generally means within less than 3 years old, that's a taxable supply. You have to charge VAT when you're selling a new building that you've constructed. It's not very often that parish councils will do that, but it's something that's worth knowing before you make a mistake. Similarly, if you lease land or you lease a building to somebody, again, normally exempt from VAT. There are ways we can change that, and there are some variations on it, but generally, if you lease a land, if you lease a building, exempt from VAT. One exception that has caught at least one, probably 2 parish councils out, if you lease holiday accommodation, it's a taxable supply. You need to charge VAT on it. If you lease a site for accommodation, so you're just providing bare land and somebody provides holiday chalets or something, or a caravan park on it, that's also a taxable supply that will attract VAT, may lead you to needing to register for VAT as a council. Residential property, again, if you rent out residential property, exempt from VAT. On the other hand, if you lease moorings for leisure boats, they attract VAT at the standard rate. If you hire rooms out, again, it's part of a building, it's part of a piece of land, normally exempt from VAT. And people often get confused on this point and think that because they're hiring rooms out, they need to charge VAT or need to register for VAT, and it will make a difference or help them in some way. On the other hand, where we provide more than just a room, where there's a package of things, and particularly where the room has something special like a wedding license that allows us to hold weddings there, then we may be making a taxable supply of services. And a wedding package, whatever it includes, if it includes the wedding ceremony, the wedding breakfast, if it's a package made up of a room plus flowers plus music, plus a member of staff on hand to serve the drinks and things like that, wedding packages and indeed party packages, things like that, are a taxable supply of services as well. If we let a piece of land, a small piece of land, for somebody to have a car boot pitch for half a day or whatever it may be, that's also use of land and that's VAT exempt, but that does contrast with off-street car parking. Off-street car parking, the Isle of Wight Council fought all the way, I think, to the Court of Appeal on the issue of off-street car parking, but HMRC's view was it was a taxable supply, and the court has supported that position. We've done at least 4 long backdated VAT registrations for councils with car parks in the last 6 months because they just didn't realise they should have been VAT registered and charging VAT on their supply of car parking. So it's a big area that can catch parish councils out. If you provide training as a council, so if the council is the body that is charging people for attending a training session, it's VAT exempt. That's not normally the case. So if it's a commercial provider, you may pay VAT on it. But if you're providing training as a local authority, it's VAT exempt. On the other hand, if you run things like a bar, if you run a cafe, if you run a shop, like a tourist information shop or something like that, and you're selling goods and services, then all of those are taxable supplies that will be subject to VAT. Bars and cafes will almost certainly lead to council needing to be registered for VAT. So it's another area that councils do get caught out on. Museum admission generally exempt from VAT if you're operating a museum. But most events, so firework events, music concerts, film shows and things like that, all kind of charge, if you're charging fees on those, they can all attract VAT. So it's an area we need to be careful of. Do you need to be registered for VAT? The law says, yes, if you make any taxable supplies, you need to register for VAT. In the real world, of course, HMRC don't want you registered for VAT because you charge somebody £50 and you might have to charge £10 of VAT. So if the tax that you would charge to your customers would exceed £1,000, so in most cases, that's about £5,000 of sales income, HMRC would expect you to be registering for VAT at that point. Key point, the £85,000 threshold does not apply to local authorities. And if you're not a VAT registered council, if you undertake any of these taxable activities I've described, you're not entitled to reclaim the VAT on the costs. So, for example, buying beers for your bar, you're not entitled to reclaim the VAT on those unless you're VAT registered and you're charging VAT on the sales. I'm conscious I've got things in the chat. I'm going to have a look. I'll come to those at the end, I think. That's probably easiest. Big issue is VAT exempt activity. If we're undertaking things which are exempt from VAT, like room hire particularly, or leasing a building to someone, we can only reclaim the VAT if the amount involved is less than £7,500 in the year. Okay, if it exceeds that sum, we can't reclaim any of it. Okay, what do I mean by that? We're looking at the costs of providing your rooms for hire, so the cost of providing your village hall, for example, that you're hiring out. If we use a building or a piece of land for lots of different things, we can split it. We can apportion the cost between different things. So in this case, we can say most of the buildings are hall for hire. That's a VAT exempt business activity. But we also have a council office in there, which is a non-business activity. We're running a cafe, which is a taxable business activity, so we can split the costs up. And I haven't actually measured this because I just moved some blocks on the screen to make it. But I would say that the hall is about 70% in this case, the cafe is about 10%, and the office is about 20%. So we can split the costs and say only 70% of the costs relate to an exempt activity in this case. what are we going to do with it? We need to do a partial exemption calculation, which means that we look at all of our costs for the year and we split them between those different activities, whether they're non-business, exempt, or taxable activities. And then we work out how much VAT is involved in this case. And we're only interested in the middle bit. So if it's non-business, we can always reclaim it as a local council. If it's taxable and we're VAT registered, that's great. We can register VAT on the stuff that we can reclaim VAT on the stuff we've purchased. If we're not VAT registered and we undertake taxable activities like running a bar or cafe, we can't reclaim VAT on the cost of doing those things unless we become registered. The bit that is questionable, and we have to work out whether we're entitled to reclaim it or not, is the cost of doing the exempt things like providing rooms for hire, meeting rooms and things like that. And when we do it, we are not interested in all the other bits. We're only interested in what costs have we incurred, what have we paid for relating to our rooms for hire, our village hall, or whatever else it may be. And we work out the VAT on those. And the question is then, can we reclaim VAT on that amount? Is it over £7,500, in which case we can't, or is it under £7,500, in which case we can? Okay, and if you can't, if you're over, there are ways to deal with it. We also need to be aware when we do a big project, which is going to incur a lot more VAT than that. If it's a construction project over £250,000, there is a 10-year period we have to be careful of, and we may have to repay VAT. So my finishing words on that, really take advice before starting a really big project. It's no good taking advice at the end and say, we built a new building, what do we do now? You need advice before you start paying the bills on that.